Welcome to this week's episode of PreZenze. This week we have an amazing leader and human, Dr. Saúl Jiménez Sandoval, who is the president of Fresno State. Welcome, Saúl.
Thank you, Cindy, for having me. And it's great to be with you, and it's great to see you and talk to you, exchange ideas with you as we used to do before when you were at Fresno State. So it's an honor for me to be here with you.
Thank you. And I'm honored that you made a time for me. For our viewers and listeners that don't know, Saúl was my former boss. Before I tell you a little bit more about him, I've said this a couple of times on the podcast, and I'll say it again. You forget what people say, but you remember how they make you feel. And I remember, Saúl, that when I first met you, when I was interviewing for my former position at Fresno State, there was a certain kindness, but also undivided attention that you gave me. And in this busy world that we live in, we're always in a rush. We're always looking at our phones. We're always thinking about the next thing. And we don't always give our full selves, our full presence to somebody. And the day that I met you, you did. So I've never forgotten that.
Thank you for that. No, thank you.
And I also remember that when you were my boss, as you do now, you've always had a very tight schedule. But when you met with me and you met with other people, again, you were fully present. And I think that that's something that should never be understated or undervalued. And it's a wonderful signature and mark of a good leader, is a leader who's present and fully engaged. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Saúl. Saúl is the president of Fresno State. Before that, he was a professor for almost 15 years. His areas of specialty are Spanish and Portuguese. He has written numerous papers and books. This is really quite outstanding. He oversaw over 30 master theses as well as other projects. That's a lot in 15 years. I don't know how you managed that, Saúl.
It was a lot of work, but it was a labor of love, Cindy.
It was a labor of love, indeed. And after being a professor for almost 15 years, you then became dean, which is when I met you.
Right.
And then you became provost and vice president of academic affairs. And now at your current post, you're president of Fresno State. That is quite an impressive trajectory. I often wonder to myself, how did he do it? Well, obviously a lot of hard work, but it's still really impressive. And with that said, we can go into somebody's workplace page and read their bio, or we can ask them to tell us a little bit beyond what's written in a bio. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself beyond what we find on paper?
Yeah, so I like you said, I've dedicated my entire career at Fresno State. I grew up in the Fresno region. I came to Fowler, which is a city that's about 15 minutes south of Fresno, very small city, about 5,000 people nowadays. Back then, it was about 3,000 people. So it's a pretty small town where everyone knows each other. The high school to which I attended was also very small. My graduating class had about 86 people in it.
Wow.
So, quite small. We all knew each other as well. But prior to that, I arrived to the region when I was about to be 10. And when that happened, I really, for the first time, started this questioning of who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? And where am I going with everything that I've been given? And I was given the good, and I was also given the bad, of course.
Right.
During that time, there were people who were extremely gracious and welcoming and saw in me the potential of the future of the region. A region is robust and is strong when you have people who are in it. A region begins to wither when the population begins to slow down, as we have seen in many of the small towns. in the Midwest, for example, across
Yes.
the US. But there were other people as well who really came to the foreground and said, you are not welcomed here, and
Mm.
you are a stranger, and you are a foreigner. So
Wow.
this notion of my seeking out the sense of belonging,
Mm.
where do I belong? Who am I? And then ultimately saying to myself, not only do I belong here, but the land belongs to me. That's really powerful, right?
It is.
It's not
I
just it's not just belonging, but actually articulating that really specialized level, sort of like the highest level of understanding of belonging for me is when somebody says, and now the land belongs to me as well.
I've never heard somebody articulate it that way before until today, Saul, and I love it. Can you tell us when that moment happened and how that moment
Yeah.
happened?
It's actually quite a story too, because it happened. I was coming back from the university. I decided to not stay here at Fresno State since I grew up in the region. I had the option of coming to Fresno State, and some family of mine had come to Fresno State prior to me as well. My brother had been here,
Mm.
but I decided that I was not going to stay, not because I didn't want the university, but because I felt like I needed to be on my own. And I'll explain that in the following way. I am the eighth of eight children. So I have five sisters and I have two brothers,
Mm.
and I'm the youngest. And as the youngest, there are certain privileges. I'm going to put it on the record to
Right.
be the youngest. Absolutely.
Yes.
Right. Everyone looked after me and everyone wanted to sort of like pave the road for me. At that point, I decided that I needed to go away because I needed to grow on my own. I needed to find my own man inside of me. So I went to Irvine, your alma mater as well, I believe. Uh,
Yes.
and in Irvine, then I really started to find myself, to find my voice, to find like this mission. And I was coming back from the university. I took the train. I was a sophomore in college, and I took the train back to Fresno. I got off the train, and my brother was there to pick me up. And I was expecting my father also to pick me up. I was expecting my dad to come and pick me up. I greeted my brother and I said, "How's it going? Great to see you. Where is dad?" And he said to me, "He's at the ranch working. He's always working." So then I got my stuff and I told him, "Why don't we stop by to see him? I want to see him." So we arrived at the ranch and I could see him from a distance. And my dad just passed away about a year and a half ago. So this is,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
thank
Deepest
you.
condolences.
No, thank you, Cindy. So it's emotional for me as well.
Mm.
But at the same time, I was there. I saw him from a distance. He was wearing white, to protect himself from the sun because it reflects the sun quite well. And he was wearing his hat. And there was a shed, and he went into the shed. Really, when he saw me, he went into the shed quickly, and then he came out. And I knew that he had something in his right hand. The hand was closed. And then I greeted him, and I saw him, and he was sweaty and he was dirty from the dirt of the ranch. He had been working a lot that day. I could see that he was tired. I could see that he was
Mhm.
also thirsty. His
Mhm.
lips were not, fully hydrated, but his eyes were bright and his eyes were always, greeting me with like this energy that was with him. And then all of a sudden, he extended his arm to me. He opened his palm, and on his palm was this perfect, beautiful red tomato. It
Wow.
was this little cherry tomato that he had grown and that he had selected for me as the best tomato of the day that he had seen, because he wanted me to have it. He wanted me to, he was expecting me that day. At that moment, to go back to that sense of belonging, I realized that my father had been working in the fields since 1951. So
Ooh.
since 1951, he had been in the Fresno region, giving of his best to the land so that the land could produce food for the rest of us to eat. And in that moment, then I realized that not only did my father's honest, good work, productive work, gave me the opportunity to belong, but it also gave me the opportunity to say, and the land also belongs to me. And this was after years and years of my searching for an identity within this country, with founding fathers with whom I did not really relate because they did not look like me, with histories that did not really speak of my own experience. And finally, before me, my own personal history came alive, and my own personal history gave me the opportunity to say, my father's hard work and my community's hard work that sustains the agricultural powerhouse of the Central Valley that feeds the nation and the world. We produce 25% of all the food in the nation, by the way, in the Fresno region, which is just staggering, right? And that is produced thanks to people who look like me and people who give of themselves to the land in order so that the land can feed the nation and the world. So that moment, it was pivotal for me. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to return to the region, and I knew that I wanted to give back to the region the privilege of education that it had given me, throughout this process of my life.
Wow, I'm a little emotional listening to your story, Saúl. Wow. Especially given that your father transitioned this past year. So
right.
It has different layers and even more meaning. So you reminded me of my own journey when I left. I left Los Angeles for my undergraduate work, and I went to Boston.
Right.
Where I also had several coming of age moments, not as profound as yours, but
I'm sure they were.
I had some moments where for the first time, I met people similar to me, in the sense that my family comes from Central America, and I didn't have a lot of that growing up. California has a large Latino, Latina, Latinx community, whichever term is preferable to you. But it does not necessarily mean that there was a diversity of people from that region when I was growing up. So I remember when I was in Boston and I started to meet other Central Americans and South Americans, and so many things that I thought were culturally odd for me that I thought I was doing. I realized, oh, they think and are doing the same thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And it was that moment of belonging.
Right.
Even if it just meant meeting other students similar to me. Although I wish I would have had that sense of land that you did. However, I came from an urban center versus you came from a more rural type of America, which is the heartland of America. And we forget that.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So, which is actually a great segue for the next question that I had for you, which is, why was becoming an educator and then moving into leadership at the university level important for you?
Yeah, I'll go with the first question first. Why did I go into education? Originally, I was going to go into biology, with the intention of going into the medical field. And then from there, I would have done a career with that. I began to take the general education courses at Irvine. And in doing so, I began to see myself reflected on the page for the first time in my life. Throughout my schooling, I had very good teachers at the Fowler Unified District. However, these teachers were not speaking of me as an individual. They were not speaking of me as someone of Mexican descent who had this incredible heritage, literary heritage, cultural heritage, world heritage that had contributed not only to America, but also to the world and to humanity in itself. So for the first time, I saw myself discovering the multiplicities of what it meant to be a Spanish speaker. And within that, I dove, very deeply into Spanish history and into South American history. My undergraduate thesis is on Chile and Peru because I wanted to understand more about that field. I became a history major because I wanted to know more about the Spanish-speaking world that is so diverse, like you just articulated right now, with so many people in it and so many cultural practices that are unique to us, that are so rich. So I wanted to go into education after that because I wanted to lead my students into this discovery of themselves, for themselves. And in doing so, what I knew would happen would be that they would then empower their families. And then in turn, they would become these beacons, shining, powerful beacons of light and hope for the communities that would see them and would say, if she did it, I can do it too. So, you mentioned the 30 theses that I directed. I would see that, and I poured my heart and soul into the master's program because I saw that in the master's program, we would have the distilled notion of the self. A thesis is a direct reflection of the interests, of the specific gifts that someone has, but more than anything, it's an interpretation of the world that someone says, I'm going to interpret the world not because I have a necessity to interpret it, but because I have a gift to give you. I have knowledge to give you so that the world becomes better. I have wisdom to share with you so that you know my perspective, and then together with other perspectives, we can build a stronger world. So those theses are so important to me because each one of them is so different, but each one of them manifests an individual claiming herself, claiming himself, and saying, this is who I am. This is what my history is. I see the potential of my presence, and I see the potential of the present moment that is going to constitute my perception of the future, of my next steps. So when I went into education, I would see my students, they were shy, they were unassuming, they were full of insecurities, thinking that we had, probably made a mistake in accepting them to Fresno State. As freshmen, they would come in like that. And then slowly they would begin to see themselves in the language, in the culture, in the literature, in the history, in the successes, in the celebration of excellence that they had within them. And then soon they would begin to say, this is who I am. Now we know exactly what I want to do moving forward. And that transformation of, not knowing who you are and then suddenly finding the moment in which you say, I know exactly what to do and I'm going to give it back to the community. It really just was the impetus, was the energy cell within me that kept me going and going. On to your second question, when I went then to administration, it was a huge sacrifice for me. Like a huge sacrifice. I remember
Why?
I remember feeling this emotional turmoil within me because I knew that I had certain gifts. I knew that I had the gift to bring people together, which is what I had done with my department. And I knew that I had ideas about where I wanted to take the College of Arts and Humanities back then. So in order for me to lead the college, I had to sacrifice, and I use that word very intentionally, I had to sacrifice my being in the classroom and interacting with my students and discussing deep philosophical, humanistic issues that are so fundamental to our existence. So in doing so, I decided that I would then do that on a grander scale, on a bigger impact. And to this day, Cindy, to this day, about every 3 months, I dream that I'm in the classroom.
Wow. Wow. And you know what was so interesting is that I was going to ask you what your biggest challenge was when this whole trajectory that you've had from professor to being
Yeah,
in an administrative leadership role. And there's always challenges,
there are.
there's
There are.
always hiccups, but it seems like this one was the main challenge.
This is the main challenge. The main challenge for me was that I thrive on the energy of people,
Mhm.
literally. And again, it goes back to my own, the first question that you asked me, tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm the 8 of 8. I was born into a large family. I was
Mhm.
socialized into being with a lot of people, and I garner the energy by interacting with people directly. I was sort of like recharging my energy cells each and every time with the students with whom I would meet.
Mhm.
And when you become an administrator, you don't have access to the classroom. You don't have access to the immediate impact that education has on the lives of individual students. And that was the biggest challenge for me. So I had to find spaces, I had to find time. I had to carve out time.
If I may interject,
Sure.
Saul, I remember reading this program that you were doing. Please correct me if I'm not titling it right. Teach Me Something,
Yeah,
where
right.
where
That's exactly it.
I thought it was absolutely
Yeah,
brilliant. Where
that's as president, right? So as
right,
president, I have a program that says you teach me something, and I try to attend 10 classes per semester. So different professors from all walks of
mhm.
disciplines and everything else reach out to me and say, come to my class on such and such a day, and I'm going to teach you this. So I've learned a lot through that. Yeah.
And has that helped you with navigating the
It has.
challenge of
It
not
has.
being, yeah, oh,
Right. So this is what I've done, right? So I have had to carve out spaces
mhm,
and time in which I say to myself, this is how I'm going to keep my leadership real.
mhm,
I feel that once someone becomes a leader, it's very difficult to get the feel of the land, what's
right.
happening. So in order for me to be an effective leader, I need to know where my students are because I haven't taught since 2013. It's been a while. So because of that, then I need to know who my students are, what challenges they're facing, what they're producing as well. So I have that teach me something, but I also came up with a booth.
Yes.
Um,
I remember seeing photos on social media of
right,
you in the booth.
right. So the booth is, twice a month. I
Mhm,
spend an hour just at the booth, and I spend an hour talking to anybody who wants to talk to me. And in return, I give them a Fresno State pin and
mm,
stickers.
nice.
So it could be a student, or it could be a faculty, or it could be a staff. And it's an informal way of saying, I have an issue. Can you help me? I give them a card,
Mhm,
follow up
right.
with them after that. Or saying, you're doing a good job. Thank you very much. We don't often get that as
No, you
leaders,
don't. Not
right?
always, right?
Or after that, it could be, I have an idea. And the idea is this. And then, I will follow up with that idea as well. So it grounds me to my mission.
Nice. When you were provost and vice president of academic affairs, you also had an initiative where you visited every department. And I remember walking on campus one day, running into you as you were riding your scooter, going from one department to another, just so that you could save time and be efficient and
Right.
get to the next place. In a similar vein, as with understanding your students, right? You were
Yeah.
also doing
right,
your best to understand
right,
your faculty.
right. Yeah, I think that was really fundamental for me. Provosts are in charge. So, what is a provost, right? A provost is the academic leader at the university that is in charge of all the teaching. So that means that that person is responsible for two basic elements. One is the teaching appropriate right now. Are we teaching materials that are going to stimulate thinking, research, and growth within our students? Number one. But number two, which is more fundamental to me, is where do we go from here? The provost is the person who decides what positions are going to be approved, and that determines the innovative aspect of the academy moving forward. What fields are we going to then explore, and what fields do we then let go of as well? Because that's necessary, right? We need to adapt and change with the industry and then with the needs of our world as well. So in doing so, I knew that I needed to get to know all of my departments, but not by going to the college, which would be, a huge brushstroke, but I wanted to get to know the cell, the cellular
Right.
element. So that's why I went to all of those departments for an hour. It took me 56 hours at the end because there were 56 departments.
Wow, that was really quite a Herculean feat. And with that said, that's also a great segue to another question that I had for you, which is, in your opinion, how is the higher education landscape changing or evolving, if at all? And how does that intersect with your vision as university president?
I think it is evolving quite a bit, actually. It's evolving because we just went through a pandemic, and all of a sudden we were forced to go online. Many of us back in 2006, 2007, 2008, online classes became a thing. And back then, the faculty closed ranks. I was one of them, and said, we will not teach online at all. We need to be in the classroom. We need to be present. We need to encourage our students to think and to relate to each other and to grow emotionally as well as academically. With the pandemic, though, we have now seen that there is great potential in connecting with the individual through the virtual world, like you and I are doing right now.
Right.
It's getting to know what disciplines, what levels are going to be most productive, most beneficial to our students. I'll give you an example. The first semester that we went online, which was fall of 2020, we analyzed the grades after that of everyone because we wanted to know where people were. And we found out pretty deep insights. The freshmen who came in as new students in fall 2020, we thought English, very simple. We can just, we can teach writing and we can teach the development of thought through the virtual mode. We found out that it was not as effective. We found out that the students were not getting the grades that they were getting before. So that means that there's an element of the writing process that needs direct human interaction, feedback. We become good writers when somebody tells us, you got to put a comma here, or this is off, this is a run-on. The thesis is not strong enough. The initial sentences of each of the paragraphs are not, they're not reflecting back on the thesis. You're not developing the conclusion appropriately. All of this can be written down on a page. That's fine. But I think we need more of the human element in order for the person to grow and reach the level in which they say, writing is not an assignment. Writing is the development of my own self, my own identity, my own interpretation of the world. And when I write, only I can write that one sentence that comes out of me in that one, space of time. That's why, you can tell who is writing to you text messages because they have specific syntax. They use different emojis. We gravitate towards, some emojis more than others because there are so many. I will use just a few, and then you will use just a few as well, right?
Right.
So all of this is a fingerprint, is a DNA of who you are as a person. So we found out that certain classes, they're very good. Once our students are identifying with the university, with the space, with each other, then we can bring on some of these. Other classes, we feel that we have to have certain balances with them. We need to have the digital component, yes, but also the in-person component to counterbalance and to reinforce it in a pretty strong way.
Right. And I really appreciate the fact that you're talking about how you're looking at data and assessments to really look at this larger landscape, but at the same time, try to find ways to maintain our humanity, our
Yeah.
spirit of who
Right,
we are and why we attend a university to
right,
learn. One of the reasons for my undergraduate work, I went to Boston was because I remember teachers telling me, you'll find yourself when you
right,
leave home and
right,
when you interact, when you are in that space of questioning. And I remember doing that. Obviously, it was different in the 90s than it is today. But this element of the pursuit of the self through knowledge
right.
and through those interactions is pivotal and
It is.
fundamental to
It
our
is.
human experience. So I think it's wonderful that you're finding ways to continue to engage with that
Yeah,
process,
yeah.
but also modernize and stay
Right,
with the
right, right,
times. So
right.
that's fabulous. Quick question.
Sure.
What has touched you the most in your career? And something quick, it doesn't have to be anything too elaborate, but something that you've seen in recent years that made you say, yes, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and my service matters.
Graduation. I'm just gonna say it.
Graduation.
I'm just gonna say it. It's a
Graduation.
huge, huge day for every one graduate that is
Mhm.
participating in our graduation ceremonies.
Mhm.
People come to cheer them on. It fills me with emotion. It fills me with happiness that we are literally changing the landscape of the Central Valley. Fresno State is the one institution that permeates every facet of Valley life. And you see it in
Yes.
graduation. So it would be graduation.
Yes. I want to be mindful of times. I have two more questions for
Sure.
you. One is there any new initiative that may be launching this year at Fresno State that you think people might want to know about?
Yeah, so we have the strategic plan that's launching, which is great.
Oh,
I'm also diving pretty deeply into the notion of branding.
mhm,
How do we brand Fresno State appropriately with all of the breadth and scope and power that it has within the community and outside of the community? Oftentimes, I find that people don't appreciate what they have because it's just, part of the wallpaper of the background. So really highlighting who we are to ourselves in order to then showcase it to the rest of the world. That's really important to me. There are some initiatives that are out there that are potentially will be very beneficial to Fresno State. There's Measure E, for example. I cannot endorse it. I cannot go against it. But if it were to pass, it has an incredible potential of benefit for the university.
mm,
There's also the possibility of conferences, so for more exposure as well. Again,
mhm.
we're talking about branding and who we are, and really telling our story. The story of Fresno is an incredible story. We are hardworking people who
Yes.
produce a lot, who feed the world, and whose backbone is a strong work ethic of strong communities. We're the ninth most diverse city in the U.S.,
Wow.
which
I
really,
didn't know that.
yeah, which really says a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you have some of the best Thai food here, but you also have some of the best Indian food, the best Mexican food as well as Middle Eastern food. We have people from Syria, We recently received a lot of people from Ukraine. So we're a constantly shifting, evolving city with its population and with its people as well. So it's a pretty fascinating area. So it's branding Fresno, and it's positioning Fresno State to own its rightful place within the valley, within California, and also within the world. We produce the third most iconic product in California. Hollywood is one, Silicon Valley with technology is two, and then it's agriculture, it's us.
And
So
we need to eat. It's
hey, we do.
basic.
Yeah.
It's,
Imagine that thought, Cindy.
right? I love Hollywood. I have many friends in the industry who are also guests on this podcast, and
Right.
there's so much value in Hollywood. There's so much
Oh,
value
absolutely. Yeah.
in technology in the Silicon Valley. But at the end of the day, we are in a human body and we do have certain biological needs.
We
So
sure do.
I think that food ranks up there. I'd like to ask you some final thoughts in terms of what would you recommend, or any advice that you may have for current leaders who are in that process of staying true to themselves, or rising leaders in terms of how they can show up in their authenticity and leadership and do their part in creating a better world?
Yeah, there's a core value to that in me. One, it's not about you. And at the same time, it's all about you. And it might seem contradictory. It's not about you because it's not about yourself or your career or your reputation or whatever else. It's not. It's
Mhm.
really not. Great leaders are those who are able to leverage the passion and the vision they have to promote the greater good and reach new levels of excellence, not for themselves, but for the people, for the community. And that's why it's all about you. It's all about you because ultimately you have the power to decide where to take the university, in my case, that unit of leadership.
Mhm.
It's about you because you embody that vision that is going to take them to the next level, everyone to the next level. And you are also responsible for saying something is not going right and I need to do something about it. We have to be accountable. We have to be
Yes.
accountable for it. So,
Yes.
so it's not about me because I am an instrument of the greater potential, the greater power that rests within the greater Fresno region. That's what it's about. The valley is really what's at stake here. It's my students who see me and say, I'm going to do it and I'm going to get it done. And I'm going to get it done not for me again. I'm going to get good grades because it feels good for me, but I'm going to do it in honor of my mother or father or siblings
Mm.
or neighbors or greater community. It's really fomenting the sense of who we are, this presence, your podcast, this
Mhm.
presence of a community going in the right direction with each other's back at hand. So that's what I would say to current leaders. Don't believe in your position, because once you believe in the position, you put the car on cruise control and you say, I'm doing this because I'm the president. No, don't use your title in
Mhm.
petty ways. Use your title in order to further the strength of others, in order to further the strength of the community.
That was very powerful, very impactful, but also very human centric, which is what I believe is at the core of not just our relationships, but leadership. So, from the bottom of my heart, as a friend, as a former colleague, as your former subordinate, thank you for your beautiful message. And I know without any doubt that our listeners will appreciate it. Fresno State is a wonderful institution with wonderful opportunities. So I highly recommend that you go to the website and learn more about it.
Thank you.
There's a lot of hidden wealth. And I'm using the word hidden wealth because sometimes the obvious isn't so obvious,
Right.
and yet the wealth exists. So thank you so much,
Thank
Saúl.
you. Thank you very
It's
much.
been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you to your listeners as well.
Thank you for joining us on PreZenze. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.